Good afternoon, Vice Mayor Richardson. It's 1 o'clock. Would you like me to read the housekeeping remarks?
All right, folks, welcome to the November meeting of the Marine Ports Committee. Let's go ahead and do roll call.
Vice Mayor, can we begin with the housekeeping remarks and then roll call?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you in participating in our hybrid meeting for the Marine Ports Committee meeting for South Coast AQMD. We have 3 formats for participation: in-person, Zoom, and teleconference. In-person attendees must not connect to the Zoom application or teleconference while in the meeting room. Please silence your other communication devices to prevent disruptions during the meeting. All participants on Zoom, except for board members and South Coast AQMD staff, will be placed on mute by the host. You will not be able to mute or unmute your line manually. After each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment. For those of you in the room, please use an iPad in the lobby area to submit your request to make public comment. Your name will be called when it is your turn to speak. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the raise hand button. For those calling in by phone, you can dial *9 to signal you would like to comment. Your name or part of your phone number will be called when it is your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for the entirety of items on the agenda and 3 minutes or less for non-agenda items. The chair may provide a shorter length of time depending on the number of requests to speak received to allow everybody an opportunity to be heard. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. If interpretation is needed, more time will be allotted. Please note you can hang up or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Masks are required for all in-person participants at all times, except when you're actively eating or drinking. Please adhere to the speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being dropped from the meeting. Lastly, please be aware that this video conference meeting is being recorded. By participating in this meeting hosted by South Coast AQMD, you agree to authorize recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD. And with that, Vice Mayor, I turn it back over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's go ahead and open up the meeting with roll call.
Supervisor Bartlett?
Here.
Senator Delgado? Absent. Mayor Pro Tem McMillan?
Here.
Board Member Padilla-Campos? Absent. Co-Chair Buscaino? Absent. Co-Chair Richardson?
Here.
And I see Board Member Padilla-Campos? Yes.
My audio's a little off, so I'm gonna switch to my phone. I hope you guys can hear me.
I can hear you. Thank you. Sounds like we have a quorum. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Co-Chair Buscaino let me know that he's away traveling at the National League of Cities conference in Atlanta in his role as immediate past president, so he couldn't be with us today to co-chair this committee. We have a short agenda today, and I want to. We just have just one item: update on the ports MOU. And before we get going, I do need to state that I do not have a financial interest, but I am required to identify for the record that I'm the vice mayor for the city of Long Beach, which is involved in this item. I'm going to, we're going to get started and do public comment first, then staff presentation, and then board member comments. And that'll be the order. No vote is required on this item today. It's just a report out. And I'll start with a little bit of context. We began on this process, undertaking, we have board direction to achieve an MOU with the twin ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles. That direction was in August. We directed staff to pursue an MOU. The direction was done in tandem with direction that in 4 months, staff would have the authority to begin internal research on port indirect source rule concepts. And by the 6-month mark, which would be February, we would have an adopted MOU. That was the goal. So I want to be clear, that we are, this is our November meeting. We have a goal for the December meeting to have a material MOU worked out that can begin the process of being adopted. And so we'll be hoping to hear progress on that. And so let's go into item number 1, and let's take public comment first. So now will be a good time to raise your hand for public comment. I'm going to ask the clerk to go ahead and let's see. Oh, okay, I see hands coming up. So I'm going to go through and list the hands. So I see Raj Dillon will be first. I see Eli Lippman, Yossi, Heather Tomley, Jesse Marquez, Fernando Guyton, Darryl Golden, Harvey Eder, and Mandira. That's who I see on public comment. So let's start with Raj Dillon, followed by Eli Lippman.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Excellent. Good afternoon, all. My name is Raj Dillon, representing Breed Southern California. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization located in LA and focused on improving air quality and lung health throughout the Southern California region. Just first want to thank AQMD board and staff for providing the space today. I just want to make a couple of points. Number one, back in August, we at Breed Southern California submitted a letter to the governing board advocating for a port's ISR that will meaningfully reduce diesel emissions in the San Pedro Bay Port Complex, because the MOU process, quite frankly, has been proven to be woefully insufficient. And the ports remain the largest source of emissions in our region. The diesel particulate matter from port sources continue to disproportionately impact the health of our frontline port communities. And given that, we believe an ISR is past due, and let's make that happen, please. My second point, about 3 weeks ago, Governor Newsom and Secretary Buttigieg announced a $5 billion loan to help modernize California ports. It's not clear to me where that money is going to be spent, how it's going to be spent. What can AQMD and the ports and the cities of LA and Long Beach, what can they do to ensure that we are getting a sufficient piece of that pie to help incentivize the transition from diesel to clean alternatives at our ports? Additionally, the infrastructure bill that was passed and signed recently, how can we get a sufficient piece of that pie to help build out the infrastructure at the ports that we need? And how can we, as Breed Southern California, how can we help? Because that's something that we'd love to help with and love to help make happen. And so with that, I'll conclude my comments, and thank you again.
Thank you. Next is Eli Lippman.
Eli Lippman with Move LA. We are an advocacy organization interested in greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, air quality, movement, public transit. Thank you, Chair Richardson, for creating this space to discuss these items and for being a leader on this. We would like to support Raj's comments. The estimated cost of implementing the 2017 cap ranges from $7 billion to $14 billion. What we've seen so far is just tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. We want to know how you get to that number. The cap included a goal of moving 50% of cargo onto rail. It included by 2023 cutting emissions to 77% of DPM 59% of NOx, 93% of SOx below 2005 levels, especially considering the increased traffic at the port and the information about the NOx emissions dramatically going up from Anchorage and Perth over the last several months. How are you going to achieve that? We want to understand how you achieve the zero emission port goal. And none of these things, all of these things really need to be outlined in an MOU. You know, ship are spewing, you know, the ports are generating 20 tons per day of these toxic pollutants, and they should be getting down to under 10 tons per day in total, which is still way too much, but it's the goal that we need to see and the interim steps to getting there. How, again, Raj's point, how are you going to go after and spend that $5 billion loan in shorts on clean infrastructure? The $1.4 billion that the CEC just approved and the $8 billion for hydrogen hubs. Where are you going to purchase and find the land for charging and filling infrastructure? And do you have those agreements in place for reliable power? And what we're seeing so far is just a list of things that are being done or maybe will be done or studying, but it isn't a strategy. And that's what we want to see, is a plan that gets us to under 10 tons per day per port. We want to see those interim goal steps, you know, a spending plan per year on how that's going to be there. And I think the refinery rule that you just passed is really a good indicator of how this can be done. And not only reducing dramatically the pollution, creating and standing up thousands and thousands of good paying, high quality jobs for local workers to build that infrastructure that's going to be necessary to both fuel and charge all of the equipment that's at the port. Again, thank you for the time. We'll be tracking this closely, and we look forward to seeing something strong with goals and steps in the near future.
Thank you. Next, we have Yossi.
Good morning, or good afternoon, rather. My name is Yossi, and I'm a senior campaign representative with the Sierra Club's My Generation campaign. And it's tough to create a public comment before the staff presentation. I just want to give a shout out to all the hard work here in trying to reach a longstanding need for a port ISR that was originally recommended by staff. I want to support the staff as much as possible in that original recommendation. Last Monday, we faced a disappointing decision from the Port of Long Beach to invest 90% of the clean truck fee into low NOx or natural gas vehicles. This is a big step backward. And if we're going to be here looking at air emissions reductions at the ports, we cannot continue to emit methane and hot greenhouse gases that contribute to air pollution in communities that are affected by the highest amounts of cancer clusters, according to a MATE study that this agency has drafted. So my comments are here to support the Port ISR process. Whatever agreement you all negotiate will not even scratch the surface. And I look forward to seeing what the content of the discussion that's going to be presented here today, and look forward to seeing what's going to be presented in December as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And just to be clear, the request for public comment to go first came after the first Ports Committee meeting. And so this was an attempt to accommodate the community request, but we can move it back to the end after this. Next is Heather Tomley.
Good afternoon. I'm Heather Tomley, Managing Director of Planning and Environmental Affairs for the Port of Long Beach. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments to this Marine Ports Committee. We'd first like to thank the AQMD staff for dedicating significant time and meeting with us over the past several months as we've worked on development of an MOU. The ports have a long history of investments and a high level of success in working with industry to significantly reduce emissions under the guidance of our Clean Air Action Plan, or CAP. We've also heard the comments of this committee that you need more, and that in this MOU, you're looking for the ports to continue to address air quality impacts with urgency and to push further than the strategies that have been identified in the CAP. In response, a few weeks ago, after significant consideration and evaluation, Port of Long Beach shared an aggressive, comprehensive, and feasible proposal with AQMD staff, identifying strategies that push beyond the measures that have been previously presented and approved by our board as a part of the 2017 CAP. The newly proposed strategies represent a significant investment by the Port of Long Beach in quickly moving to improve air quality and support community health in the South Coast Air Basin. The actions we propose to AQMD staff span across port-related operations, including drayage trucks, ocean-going vessels, cargo handling equipment, and on-dock rail, to accelerate and increase emission reductions that can be creditable to the SIP. These include not only significant near-term investments in cleaner trucks, but also support for zero-emission infrastructure. We feel confident that what we have proposed will be impactful and meaningful for air quality and community health. Our proposal is currently under consideration by AQMD staff, as you'll hear in the staff presentation later this afternoon. And we're ready to put the proposed terms in writing, and we'll be updating the latest version of the MOU to add the concrete measures that we've identified. As we proceed, we'll be seeking the AQMD staff, this committee, and your full board to support our proposal in the MOU as the preferred path forward with the Port of Long Beach, rather than pivoting to development of an indirect source rule. This type of rulemaking would only make it more difficult to work collaboratively with the port industry, will delay benefits to air quality and public health in our region, and hinder our ability to achieve our clean air goals. We look forward to successfully finalizing this MOU and moving forward on immediate actions to protect our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jesse Marquez.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I will now begin my comments. I just lost it. Oh shoot, hold on. I lost my comments on the screen. Oh my God. Okay, I found it. We only support an ISR, and we have never supported an MOU. We would not even need an ISR or MOU if the ports had complied 100% with CEQA and NEPA. We sadly have now reached over 100 ships arriving at the ports that are impacting our port and coastline and freight transportation corridor communities. We have asked the ports hundreds of times in numerous submitted public comments in terminal project EIRs, the Clean Air Action Plan, and special programs to A, include a contingency mitigation plan if the project exceeds its approved EIR, TU, and cargo projections. They still refuse to do it. We have asked them to include a truck driving hiring plan schedule to support the project terminal growth projections, and they still have not done it. We have asked them to include a freight truck purchase plan schedule to support project terminal growth projections, and they have still not have done it. We have asked them to include a truck chassis purchase plan schedule to support port terminal growth projections, and they have still not have done it. We've asked them to include a truck storage yard plan schedule to support project terminal growth. They've not done it. We've asked them to include a container storage yard need assessment and plan schedule to support projected terminal growth. They still have not done it. We've asked them to include a chassis storage yard need assessment and plan schedule to support terminal growth, and they've not done it. We've asked them to include a container true and genset storage yard need assessment and plan schedule to support terminal growth. They've not done it. We've asked them to include a shore power need assessment and plan schedule to support terminal growth. They've not done it. We've asked them to include ship emissions capture and treatment needs assessment and plan schedule to support growth. They've not done it. In fact, not one port, not one terminal has even purchased a ship emissions capture treatment on dock system, at dock system, or at anchor barge system. We've also asked them to do a ship shore power needs assessment plan schedule to support terminal growth, and they've not done it. So since they've not done it, I'm again bringing up these issues to you to support that we go in the direction of an ISR. Thank you.
Thank you. Fernando Gaitan.
Good afternoon. My name is Fernando Gaitan. I'm an attorney with Earthjustice. It's worth noting that in the 2016 Air Quality Management Plan, the Air District had set a one-year timeline for attempting a voluntary measure for emissions reductions at the ports before shifting to a regulatory approach. That was 2016. Here we are nearly 5 years later, and the Air District is being asked yet again to stall its regulatory function and provide the ports with yet more time to work out an MOU. Our region can no longer afford to stall. No one benefits from not having a clear plan to reduce emissions. The Port of Los Angeles claims that a regulatory approach will impede progress on implementing its Clean Air Action Plan. But the cap was last updated in 2017, and they have had plenty of time to implement it without regulations. At the last meeting, we heard from staff that the CAP program simply does not go far enough to reduce emissions. Meanwhile, we heard from the Port of Long Beach that it wishes to invest money to expedite a truck turnover, but the latest Clean Truck Fund Rate program ignored community stakeholder concerns and instead adopted an approach that would invest nearly 90% of funds collected on gas trucks and miss an opportunity to more aggressively invest in zero emissions. The ports continue to experience a surge of activity, which is already having an impact on our communities. The California Air Resources Board recently reported that congestion at the ports is leading to increases of 20 tons of NOx per day. And that doesn't even account for the emissions that come from all the additional activity at the ports just to get the containers off the ships and onto freight lines. We urge you not to rush into half measures that will only exacerbate our pollution crisis. Our region needs a unified and coordinated approach to clamping down on emissions, one that sets clear timetables, metrics, and reportable outcomes that will take our region into attainment. It would benefit all stakeholders for the South Coast to have a comprehensive plan that clearly outlines expectations and holds parties accountable. It's worth noting that in creating the South Coast AQMD, the state legislature found that in order to successfully achieve air quality standards, this agency with basin-wide authority would be responsible for coming up with a comprehensive strategy to implement air quality controls for all local governments and regional agencies. This agency is charged by the state legislature to regulate air pollution. It's time to regulate. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Darryl Golden.
Good afternoon. My name is Darryl Golden. I'm a resident of Long Beach and a member of the West Long Beach Association. And I'd like to talk about the ports and their request for an MOU. The ports have argued that the regulatory approach will somehow impede progress on implementation of their cap. It is a misunderstanding of their own process. The regulatory approach will help them to achieve their cap, because currently they just keep pushing numbers back. If I'm not mistaken, this is the third cap they've had, and they have not met the goals on any of the previous ones. So a MOU is not what's needed at this time. What is needed is precise measurements where they will be forced to bring down the pollution on this community. This community is still seeing the highest negative health impacts in the county of Los Angeles. And what the port is doing is trying to work on somehow and shuffle different pieces to maintain their throughput or their market share, as they like to say. It is time for every regulatory agency to pay attention and protect the residents of these communities. You cannot expect to bring about economic process on the blood and the sweat of the people of this community. It is government responsibility to protect its residents or citizens. The failure of the San Pedro Bay ports to do such within itself should make it mandatory that you have a regulatory process instead of an MOU. And it should be with definitely and precise penalties when they don't meet their goals. To continue in any way, as we have in the past, is unacceptable. because it is just doing the same thing over and over without any progress. This is worse than some of the measures that was placed on people of color and low income during Jim Crow, what the port is currently doing to these communities. There's no regard for citizens to have any type of equity in the process. Everything you ask them to do.
Thank you. Next is Harvey Eder.
Hello, am I being heard? Yes.
We can hear you.
So I can begin my comments. We've been coming to the Air District for 36 years. I'm Harvey Eder. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. And we've been litigating with the district and the state. I'm going back more than 40, but with the district since the federally ordered plan of 91, we litigated in 92, etc. And the Solar New Deal as part of the 16 plan. I'd like to thank the previous several speakers, the gentleman that just spoke, Mr. Golden, and the fellow that spoke from, I get the blank, the legal group started by the Sierra Club that Adrian's with. And also Yossi, and Yossi said this, 90% to, we've been fighting about these, this natural gas and fossil fuels, and this stuff's over. It's got to be. We're not going to make it. We fouled our nest, and we've put all kinds of stuff. I'm incorporating the records from going different committees and whatnot with the district and the Solar New Deal that we submitted into the records here. And I come from somewhat of a water-related family. I've got a brother and had nephews that were fishermen up in Oregon. We were raised around the water here, down here. Anyway, I think that we've got to convert to solar renewables, and it's got to be for all of different uses, and we've got to do it fast. And we're the center of a lot of action. 40%, they say, of imports from Asia and stuff come through these ports. And now we've got the supply problem. And also shout out to Jesse Marquez, etc. And those, I didn't know much about those groups that started, but so they say this near zero and this argument with the district of not be, that's we can't do that. Well, we brought this stuff up, and in the Solar New Deal, it's in the 16 plan, and it was started and talked out with Dr. Burke and whatnot. So there's stuff in the record about this, and it comes from the Department of Energy. Started the Sunshot program like in 2010.
Thank you. Next is Mandira.
Hi, good afternoon, y'all. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. My name is Mandira. I'm a climate campaigner with the Pacific Environment. Thank you for having us here. And I want to start by saying, reiterating the fact that we strongly support our community partners' call for a strong port ISR. We believe that we should let regulatory agencies regulate, especially given the past record of the ports failing to meet the goals that they set themselves. Also, looking forward to actually getting an update on the MOU process, unlike the previous meeting we had. I have to say, I have been disappointed that the ports haven't been forthcoming in their discussions around the MOU process. And what the meat of the things that have been discussed. Having said that, at the MOU update, I'm hoping to see that ports proposing to invest more on port electrification and investing on basic green infrastructure development. We shouldn't have to drag ports into the future, especially when the ports claim to be the green ports of Southern California. Also, I'm hoping to see update on the use of revenues coming from $100 per day container fees. As far as I have seen, there have not been a update on how this money will be spent, and I hope to see that this money is again being invested in the green in infrastructure and port electrification that needs to happen at both ports. Also, I would like to see an update and assessment on environmental impact of 24/7 port operations. We have seen big focus on the economic side, but not much update on the environmental impact. People in these frontline communities are facing a public health crisis, and we need ports to be more active and on addressing the public health impacts. Lastly, MOU. I'm hoping to see MOU including a plan to achieve CAP and 1.5C goals. It shouldn't be just a collection of random proposals. Again, thank you for the time, and I'm looking forward to seeing the update.
Thank you. Next is Christopher Chavez.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Chris Chavez, Deputy Policy Director at Coalition for Clean Air and member of the Wilmington-Carson West Long Beach AB 617 Community Steering Committee. We want to align our comments with the other environmental, public health, and community advocates and express our desire to see stronger action from South Coast AQMD by creating an indirect source rule. CARB data has shown that NOx emissions have increased by 20 tons per day due to the backlog. 20 tons per day. That wipes out all NOx emission reduction from CARB's at birth rule and then some. Meanwhile, we've seen a 0.5 ton per day increase in carcinogenic diesel particulate matter. Meanwhile, we're coming up to the deadline to replace pre-2010 trucks. Yet those trucks are not being replaced by zero emissions or even near zero trucks. They're being replaced by diesel, specifically used diesel. At a time when we're both out of attainment for federal air quality and state air quality standards, and we're in fact seeing backsliding, the status quo of voluntary agreements is insufficient. I would also suggest the ports are not negotiating in good faith with the district. On an October 25th webinar with the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, both port directors attacked South Coast AQMD, saying you didn't want to come to the negotiating table and just wanted to regulate. Port Director Gene Soroka acknowledged that they were actively seeking to weaken CEQA for port projects indefinitely, and that he backed the industry's request that Governor Newsom roll back clean air and labor protections 1,000%. That's a direct quote. As other community advocates involved with the Wilmington, Carson, and West Long Beach AB 617 process noted, the advocates support an indirect source rule. We need to see real action and real emission reductions, not voluntary deals. With that said, I do want to say that if one port isn't willing to come to the table, the district should consider treating them separately. We want to see real emission reductions from both ports, but we need to make sure that both ports are approaching the district in good faith. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Christopher Cannon.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Chris Cannon. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer and Director of Environmental Programs at Port of Los Angeles. Gene Soroka has already sent a letter to the board members, and so I'm not going to just repeat his remarks as he speaks for us. But I do want to say we support the MOU process, and we stand ready to work with AQMD staff on completion of an MOU. AQMD staff has asked us to go beyond the cap for development of new measures for an MOU. We ask that the MOU include a way to involve the CAP stakeholder process that must be part of the approval of new programs. We also hope that the board does not carry out rulemaking in parallel with the MOU, as this will have a chilling effect in our ability to carry out our programs. And finally, we have sent the committee members, as part of Gene's letter, a series of programs that we're moving forward with now that we believe will have substantial air quality benefits. And we would be happy to work with AQMD staff to find a way to get SIP credit for those programs, as well as find a way to reflect them in an MOU once they have gone through the CAPS process and are been approved by our boards. So I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. And if there are any questions or anything that you need, we're here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Elliot Gonzalez, our last speaker online.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm going to keep my comments brief. I think that a lot of my colleagues today, pretty much represented the interest of those who are concerned about the public health and concerned about the public's future and the future of the planet. We have been advocating for a solution to our port-related pollutions, and I think that we're very knowledgeable crowd when we talk about making sure that we have zero emission, or I just like to call it electric trucks. It's because we know what kind of technologies our communities need to have an efficient port that takes our children's lungs in mind. So, here we are talking about an MOU when we specifically have asked for an ISR, a strong rule that is using the power given to this agency to effectively control our pollution, which is not in attainment, which is in severe non-attainment. It's off the charts. It's in a failed state according to government regulations to define failure. We come up. We are an example of what severe non-attainment looks like. So I just want to ask that you listen to the public, that you trust our judgment, that you listen to our knowledge when we say this is the scientific recommendation to keep our emission standards down, to reduce the amount of children that get asthma. So I just think that it is very serious. It's very important. And I ask that you all take our concerns just as seriously as the issues are that we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any public comment in the chamber?
No.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
There is none.
None. Okay, great. All right, so now we'll go into the staff presentation. And so Wayne, you want to cue that up?
Our Avo E McMillan will make the presentation. Ian?
Great, thank you very much. If we can go to the next slide. I just want to go through a little bit of background. I think most folks know how we got here, but just to make sure we're on the same page with it all. In August, the board directed staff to continue pursuing an MOU with both ports. We were also directed at the same time to initiate initial research into ISR concepts, doing some internal work after a 4-month period if an MOU is not in place. That would be in December. And then in addition, if after 6 months, an MOU is not in place, then to pivot fully to developing an indirect source rule. Staff has initiated a series of weekly conference calls and meetings with staff from both ports, and that's including at many times up to the executive director level. CARB has also been brought into many of these conversations. We should say that more recently we've had a little bit more discussion with the Port of Long Beach than with the Port of LA, but there's been a lot of developments just recently, so we'll go through some of that in this presentation. Really the focus of our efforts have been to try to find those opportunities to reduce emissions, and the presentation today will go through some of that thought process about where are potential opportunities. Next slide, please. We, in the last week, or maybe just a tiny bit before then, we did hear from the Port of Long Beach, where they have discussed a potential proposal that includes additional measures beyond those that were in the previous draft MOU from the 2020 time period. There's sort of three main focuses that we heard as part of that, including advancing funding to accelerate replacement of drayage trucks, some additional measures addressing emissions from vessels and cargo handling equipment, and then also some additional measures for investments with more on-dock rail. We're still, of course, continuing to meet with Long Beach staff as we hear some more about this. We heard the testimony just a little bit ago. We're hoping to hear some or receive some more formal written proposals soon. We did also just, I just received it today, received a letter from the Port of LA that was referred to in the previous testimony as well, with some additional measures that are described there. I think from what we've heard so far, we've seen a little bit more definition of potential measures from what we've heard so far from Long Beach and what we've heard from LA, but we have heard that both ports are engaging on this. That said, we are not at a point right now where anything's been agreed upon by our staff or staff of the ports, but discussions are continuing. Next slide. Wanted to spend a little time talking about some of the congestion that we've seen at the ports recently. There's a couple charts here I want to walk through. The chart on the left is showing vessel activity, and the gray line that's pretty flat going across horizontally, that is the number of ships at berth. And you see that that doesn't change very much. It little wiggles through time. That chart goes from spring of this year through late October of this year. We see the green line shows all the vessels that are at anchor and often the drift areas, and we see that that is going up substantially, in particular here in the fall. What we have seen is that those numbers are still high even today. The last number I saw from the Marine Exchange was that there were 75 container vessels at anchor or in drift areas as of this morning. So we have seen a considerable amount of congestion, a lot of focus on that, of course, to try to find ways to reduce that. But regardless of those measures, we're still seeing a considerable amount of congestion. The chart on the right is a little bit longer time horizon. That is looking since 2010, the year 2010 through today. The green line on the bottom on that chart shows the number of containers that are moving through the ports each year. And we see a pretty steady increase since 2010. And then in this last year, a pretty substantial increase, probably going to be 20 million TEUs, maybe even a touch more by the time the year is out. The line on the top shows the amount of on-dock rail. And this is a little bit of a crude estimate of looking at the number of trains, the number of TEUs, those containers that move via the Alameda corridor, which is the primary conduit for trains leaving the ports. So the number of TEUs going through that Alameda corridor versus the number of TEUs handled by the ports. What we see is that there's a pretty long-term trend here of decreased on-dock rail movement of those containers. That back at the 2010 time period, it was at about 35%. That's dropped down to about 30% in the mid 2010s. And here in the pandemic, we've actually seen continued reduction of that on-dock rail activity. There's a lot of reasons for that. Transloading is one piece of that, where containers are taken as marine containers, which are 40-foot containers, off the ports by a drayage truck, reconsolidated into longer trailers, 53-foot trailers, in local warehouses, and then transported from there. In many ways, that's been done to be more efficient for many of the shippers, but at the ports, what we're seeing is less on-dock rail activity. The net result of both of these graphs is higher emissions. We see in the short term, all this congestion, all that extra ship activity, the extra trucking, the extra cargo handling equipment. We've seen extra emissions associated with that. With the less on-dock rail, that will also mean more trucking, which would then, of course, result in greater emissions as well. Next slide. So then the question is, how do these increased emissions affect local air quality? What I'm presenting here on this graph is a little bit of an older analysis from earlier this year. So we don't have really some of these latest numbers with really this peak congestion. But some of the earlier emissions increases we saw in springtime of this year, we saw that those additional emissions coming from ships will have an impact on fine particulate matter levels throughout the basin. And actually where we're seeing the greatest impact is not necessarily right at the port, but it's farther inland, in the Inland Empire. And for example, our highest PM 2.5 monitors are, for example, in Mira Loma, and that's where we're seeing some of these highest impacts because we're getting secondary formation of pollutants coming from the ports and affecting the Inland Empire, which is typical for what we see in our basin, but it's being exacerbated even more by the port emissions. So from those springtime levels of emissions, we saw that the increase was about 0.5 microgram per cubic meter up to about 0.5 microgram per cubic meter. But of course, we've seen, as I just illustrated, considerably greater congestion. More recently, CARB has put forward an estimate of about 20 tons per day of increased emissions. Just for context, the port's most recent emissions inventory for 2020 showed about 32 tons per day. So this represents about a 60% increase in emissions in just this very short period of time. Any gains that have been made in about the past decade from any reductions at the ports have been largely negated by this increased emissions. Next slide. So, of course, with all this congestion, there's been considerable focus, which if anybody's turned on the news, can certainly see all the attention focused on this issue. One of the more significant actions that both ports took up, and they really took this up in record time from everything we've ever seen, was this new dwell fee of $100 per day for containers that stay on the ports past certain time periods. So if a container is going to move out via truck, that would be a 9-day period. If it's moving out via rail, that's a 6-day period. And if they have containers that stay on past those time limits, they're charged $100 a day. The second day would be $200 a day. The third day would be $300 a day, et cetera. This fee was to kick in November 15th. It was just introduced probably about a month ago, maybe even less than that. It was delayed most recently after the slide was put together until November 22nd. We'll see. It's not really clear when this fee will kick in or what the criteria is for how the fee will be implemented. One thing that's also a little unclear is what the potential financial windfall from this fee would be for the ports. The graph shown here on this chart shows the number of TEUs that were sitting past that 9-day deadline as of November 1st. That's that left tall bar. And then November 8th is the second bar. We see that's 127,000 TEUs and then 101,000 TEUs. The most recent report I saw shows about 87,000 TEUs. And so the threat of this fee appears to be reducing the amount of containers on the docks. The initial drop was a fairly large percentage. The drop over the last week was less so. So it's unclear for when this fee actually goes into effect how many containers would be there. But if we just do some simple math of looking at it, it's about 40,000 containers, which would be about 80,000 TEUs. That would generate many tens of millions of dollars per week in additional fees that the ports would both collect. That could be north of $100 million if those containers sat there for the entire week, and that's every week. What is not also clear is what is that spending plan for those revenues and what would they be used for? There's been some loose talk that that will be used for congestion relief and maybe other impacts, but we have not heard anything to date for that revenue. Another thing that we've heard about is this was actually not a port initiative from what we could tell, but some of the other organizations that are associated with port activity, so PMSA, the Pacific Maritime Shipping Association, PMA, Marine Exchange, they've put forward a plan to reduce the amount of anchorage for the ships out at sea, so that instead of anchoring only a few miles from the ports, Everybody can see them from the shoreline. That this would be, they would have an anchor more than 150 miles away, well off the coast. What we've heard since this was put forward is that this will probably take several weeks to implement, at least a month, maybe a month and a half or even more, before we start to see any difference for the amount of anchorage that's occurring offshore. What we've also seen is that the proposed plan will still allow a substantial amount of anchorage still in the same areas close to shore, but reduced. But there are some differences that we think that there could be some beneficial impacts from a proposal like this. We've also seen that both ports are moving towards additional 24/7 operations. That's a little bit not just like turning on a light switch. There are a lot of things that need to go into play to get to that 24/7 operation. But there is interest in doing more of it. Next slide. So not to lose sight of sort of the centerpiece of what the ports have been looking at from the Clean Air Action Plan of a $10 per TEU fee. They've taken action on that recently as well to initiate that fee starting April 1st of next year. The potential or the approaches for spending the revenues from that fee have also been outlined. So zero emission trucks would be exempt forever from this fee. Low NOx natural gas trucks would be exempt through 2031 for Long Beach and through 2027 for Los Angeles. The funds themselves collecting about $90 million a year collectively between the two ports. Again, remember, in comparison to some of the numbers I said before for the $100 per container dwell fee, generating almost $100 million per week. So this is still, again, a substantial amount of money, but I'll go through a little bit more about what this potentially could do as far as air quality in the next slide. Los Angeles was planning to use the funds solely for zero emission trucks. Long Beach has said that they would be using the funds for both low NOx natural gas as well as zero emission trucks with up to, or at least 10% of the spending on zero emission trucks in the near term, but pivoting more towards that in future years. Trying to align more with what truck availability is out there and technology is availability out there today. Next slide. So this slide, it's a little bit complicated, so I want to just walk through it. This bar chart. What this is showing in three groupings is the years 2021, 2024, 2031, and what is the potential effect of the clean truck program. The blue bar on the left of each grouping is the worst case projection from the Clean Air Action Plan. The Clean Air Action Plan ran through a variety of different scenarios of how the clean truck program could work, some more optimistic than others. What we've shown here is to pick a worst case, in other words, the one that reduces emissions the least. As shown that here. And what we see is the bars, the higher the bar, the greater the emission reduction. So we see that blue bar in 2021 would achieve about 40% emission reduction. And that's beyond the sort of business as usual case. About 60% in 2024, about an 85, 90% in 2031. What we see with the $10 per TEU approach, and what we've tried to model here is looking at more of an optimistic scenario for what is the best that could happen with the clean truck program as currently described by both ports, with some pretty optimistic assumptions about how the cost of ZE technology will come down through time quite rapidly. We're all hoping that that is the case, but there's some pretty significant impacts if that does not happen. But what we're showing here is that at that $10 per TEU rate in 2024, rather than the 60+% emission reductions that we'd expect, we see it's about maybe about a 10% emission reduction. In addition, in 2031, that we see instead of about an 85, 90% emission reduction, we're seeing less than 40%. At higher fee levels of $30 per TEU, $50, $70 per TEU, we of course see greater emission reductions in both 2024 and 2031. One of the things that we've also are reflecting in this analysis is that the clean truck program initially I think it was understood by many that it would cause behavior change, that drayage truck operators and owners would be using different trucks to avoid the fee. But with the $10 per TEU rate, that doesn't really appear to be the case. The assumption really is that those funds would be used to incentivize trucks. And with those incentives, that's what drives the behavior, not the fee itself. Okay, next slide. There's been a number of other actions, of course, that are happening outside of the ports. So at the state level, the most recent state budget, there's significant funding that's been put forward to reduce emissions from activities associated with the ports. For example, $1.3 billion for 1,000 each of drayage trucks, transit buses, and school buses. Drayage trucks are, of course, the ones that go to the ports. That's over a 3-year period, with additional funding that's set aside also for off-road equipment and trucks and zero-emission charging and fueling infrastructure. So a significant amount of funding put forward for zero-emission operations at the ports, with a little bit of additional funding also for low-NOx CNG. In addition, more recently, Governor Newsom announced with Secretary Buttigieg that there would be $5 million in loans available for port-specific upgrades, expanding capacity for freight rail, and other similar goods movement infrastructure to really speed this improvement and emissions profile and efficiency for goods movement here in California. But to date, we aren't sure exactly what kind of projects will be proposed under this loan program. Next slide. Also recently, the governor had a recent executive order looking to address the congestion at the ports and what are some things that state government can do in the immediate near term to improve the efficiency of the system. So looking at, are there overweight limits on truck routes that can be re-examined for new truck routes? Looking at additional areas for storage for containers, et cetera, to help alleviate congestion. Continue with workforce development in the long term and in the near term, looking again at those high road jobs and directing state agencies to assist in all of these efforts. Some of that could include, for example, what we've heard is the DMV has also been looking at increasing the number of commercial truck licenses that are being provided to people seeking to drive trucks. What's also shown here on the bottom is what's happened most recently at the Port of San Diego. This is not a state action, but something else happening elsewhere in California. The Port of San Diego, a very different port compared to the ports of LA and Long Beach, much smaller when it comes to goods movement activity, but important nonetheless. And it recently approved its maritime clean air strategy, somewhat equivalent to the clean air action plans approved by our ports. And one of the things that the Port of San Diego put in there, and there's a copy and paste on the bottom right, it's a little bit fine print, but it includes a health objective to collaborate with the local air district on development of an indirect source rule. So a different approach being taken by Port of San Diego. That's all still, of course, very, very early stage. Next slide. On the federal side, again, if anybody's been paying attention to the news, there was the infrastructure bill that was passed recently that included significant funding. I'm not going to go through all of it here, but significant funding that the ports would be able to apply for both kind of traditional, roads and improvements of typical transportation infrastructure, but then also a lot towards lower emission kinds of technologies. And to try to really introduce that into the market quickly. Just even this morning as well, we heard that the House passed the Build Back Better bill. Of course, there's still, that has not been finally approved yet, but there's significant additional actions that are included in that bill as well. Next slide. Looking to EPA, they do have their Clean Trucks plan. They have stated that they expect to have that standard in place by 2027. We are still pushing to make sure that that actually becomes a reality. We do have some concerns about whether or not that will happen, but that is what EPA has said. On the vessel side, recently the United States at COP26 signed on to the Clyde Declaration, And what this is looking at is establishing green corridors to try to get green shipping in sort of port-to-port relationships, and to make sure that that clean energy infrastructure is also in place so that those vessels will be able to fuel up and utilize that infrastructure at the ports that they're regularly going to. So far, what's notable is that a major country like China has not signed on to this, which is a really important trading partner for us here in the West Coast. But we have seen that Japan and Canada have signed on. This also does dovetail nicely with a lot of the work that's gone on over the years that our Air District has led on our primary initiative. Again, that same kind of concept of port-to-port relationships and what can be done that port communities and local port authorities can provide incentives to retrofit ships or get cleaner ships to come to their ports. In addition, the U.S. is co-leading the zero-emission shipping mission with many other countries, but with the U.S. as the lead. Similar kinds of goals here, looking in the 2030 timeframe to get at least 200 ships that are primarily using zero-emission fuels, but this is really looking more at climate, zero-emission climate pollutants, and to get those out on the water. Again, that is largely European countries that are involved in that mission, but trying to advance that technology certainly has promise. One of the things that we really want to make sure is that those zero-emission fuels also reduce criteria pollutants here for our region, because ships are becoming very soon the largest source of NOx emissions in our basin. Next slide. Okay, so last slide here. So what we plan to do next is to really try to continue to identify potential opportunities to achieve emission reductions with the ports, and that's with an MOU or whatever other opportunities might present themselves. We have, received, some information from both ports. We really, need to start to understand that more as we continue to get more information from both of them. Hoping to get some written materials from Long Beach soon, which we are expecting. We know that the workforce and labor concerns associated with anything happening at the ports is of paramount concern, as is, of course, the number one concern for us is air quality for the disadvantaged communities that are living in and around the ports, and that are also impacted much farther inland from emissions from the ports. We do plan to return to the Marine Port Committee in December. We're still working on a timeline and date for that, but that is our current plan right now. With that, that concludes my presentation and available for any questions. And I apologize for the panting. It's hard to speak with a mask on. Thank you.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that presentation. We're going to take it back behind the rail for board member comments. And I'll go ahead and start. First, last meeting, we requested an update on the port congestion issue. I want to thank you for this download of everything that's happened. So much has happened, and it's great to see it all in one place. I think I would love, as the infrastructure conversations continue, there's been announcements at the ports, the Build Back Better plan, or the infrastructure plan, the federal infrastructure plan has called out ports as a significant area of investment. I want to make sure that AQMD is bringing forward recommendations and working with the ports on what types of infrastructure investments and new technologies can help advance clean air at the ports in the short, medium, and long term. We worked together with the oil refineries to do some of the same, to modernize the refineries. I wonder what a collaborative process would look like if we were to make recommendations at the ports on what types of technology could exist in the future in terms of transportation. Secondly, on the MOU, this committee was really clear at the last meeting to tell the ports that we want them to go back to their boards and get authorization to move beyond the Clean Air Action Plan and put additional measures on the table. And from what I've heard from the presentation is that we've heard some very concrete new measures from the Port of Long Beach that is under consideration. I think the slide said advancing additional resources to accelerate the turnover of trucks. I heard investments into on-dock rail. I heard more as it relates to ocean vehicles and sort of the machinery inside the port, the drayage machines. And so that's great to hear. I didn't hear as much on Port of Los Angeles. So I want to just ask staff, have the ports, if you could just restate or just clarify, have the ports gone back to their board and asked for new measures on the table? And can you summarize what those measures are? Long Beach and Los Angeles.
Thank you for the question. We did hear from Long Beach that they did go to their board to discuss additional measures, and what they had been discussing with us is, as they've told us, what they've discussed with their board. We haven't received anything in writing on that, so I think the level of detail that was provided in the presentation is what we've been asked to share at that level of detail of looking at advancing funds, looking at measures to reduce emissions from vessels and cargo handling equipment, and then also looking for additional measures to improve on-dock rail. I think the letter that we received from Port of Los Angeles last night or this morning is also looking at some incremental measures on trucks, as well as some sort of looser measures potentially on vessels. But to the extent of whether or not LA has gone to their board, I just don't know. Maybe they have. I'm just not aware.
Okay, and so I would ask at this point, when do we expect to have something in writing from Long Beach? And I'm not sure if Long Beach is here, but if someone can speak to that, when do we expect to have language in writing from Long Beach? Is someone
Hi,
from
Vice Mayor,
the board
this is
here?
Wayne.
Go ahead, Wayne.
I had a chance to speak with Mario Cordero. I want to say it was either, I think it was the night before. I was going to say last night, but I'm pretty sure it was the night before.
Okay.
And he assured me that while they could probably get the letter out next week, given the holiday situation, much of his staff was going to be out. And I said that it would be fine if we got the letter the week after next. So he said next Tuesday, not this coming Tuesday, but a week from this Tuesday after the holidays. So I fully expect them, once they've told us they do something, they do it. So we'll see it most likely a week from this Tuesday.
Okay, so and that's good news. Now let me ask the same about the Port of Los Angeles. Are we expecting anything more substantive than the letter we received?
I'm not expecting anything more substance, and I'm not aware of any discussions with staff that would indicate as such.
Okay. Okay. Now just a few more, then I'm going to go to my colleagues. I know that we set a timetable to have sort of the high level things worked out by the December meeting and be able to fine tune for the following next 2 months. If we do get what we're expecting to get from Long Beach, then are we on track to achieve our goal by February for Long Beach? And on Los Angeles, when do you think it would realistically be a fair deadline to say, hey, we need to get serious and get something in writing, or else we're going to miss our deadline? So I guess my question is, it seems like we're on track on one side. We may not be on track on the other side. How would you describe, are we on track to achieve the goal of an MOU by February?
I think there are a lot of considerations that we have to engage in. Part of the challenge that we have is, I think once we receive a formal description of the offer, we can be confident in terms of evaluating what that really means in terms of emission reductions. There's a lot of factors that we need to consider. I would say that the board has already set fair deadlines. And at this point, if we do get something a week from next Tuesday, we would certainly want to bring something back to the board for their consideration as to whether the board itself thought this was sufficient and warrant the MOU. I know that the board will ask us a lot of questions about, what does this mean, one versus the other and the like. And at this point, it's going to be difficult for us to sort of talk about some of the potential opportunities because frankly, we haven't really looked at that aspect as of yet. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to make that evaluation. And that's why the prospect of advanced funding has, from my perspective, a lot of appeal. And it's something that I think that the board will certainly want to consider. So we're going to look at those options and evaluations. And we can only look at it from sort of where we have, as you said before, Vice Mayor, the board asked the ports to go above and beyond what was within the cap. And if you're looking at advanced funding, I think that's certainly something that wasn't contemplated in the cap, as I recall it. So we have something to work with from one port, but from the other port, while I've heard that there's a commitment to continuing the process, we just haven't received anything really beyond that process at this point in time, other than a vague description and a desire to continue to work with us. And that's why I say that the deadlines that the board established, I think, are fair. And, we can certainly move forward in a few different ways. And I think you alluded to one of those being, maybe we do have an MOU with one, and maybe we have some other mechanism to deal with one that we don't have an MOU. Or there's some other mechanisms that we can look at, but I think it's probably too early to talk about that. And what we need to do is come back to you with more information. I would say not December, then certainly January, to give you a sense of where we stand, where we are.
That's very helpful. So my last thing I'll say, and then I'll go to my colleagues. So I heard a lot of the public comments say that in the clean truck rate, that 90% of Long Beach's clean truck rate is reserved for near zero. But the presentation didn't say that. The presentation said that 90% was flexible between zero emission or near zero, with 10% exclusively for zero. And is that correct? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. That they, we'll just leave it there. Correct.
I think that's a big distinction. So I certainly would like to see zero emission higher than 10%. And, I hope the ports are listening. I would like to see it higher, but I also understand that the goal is to factor in the market availability of in the short term, and also to incentivize moving away from diesel by the 2023 CARB deadline. So I certainly understand that. And I think I would love to see that number change, that 10% number change, but also we should be very, very clear that after that 2023 deadline, you're going to move toward zero emission more fully. And I think that's important to call out. And so those are my thoughts. I think to staff, good work, stay at the table. To the ports, continue to thank you. For those of you who did go back to your board and do what the committee requested, thank you, and thank you to your boards. If you have not, I strongly encourage you to get serious, given what we see as one of the most significant issues of our time, the port congestion and air quality and the impacts on our communities. Are there any hands raised by my colleagues? I don't see hands raised, but you want to go ahead and chime in if you have something to say? How about inside the chamber? Anything?
Mr. Chair, McMillan.
Thank you, Larry. You're recognized.
I just want to thank the Port of Long Beach for stepping up and getting serious with this issue. And I encourage the Port of LA to do the same. I do think that we may be better suited to heading towards bifurcating the ports unless LA gets serious. Those are my thoughts, and my goal, and I think our goal at AQMD is get diesel off the road as soon as possible. And if that means going to some near zero emission trucks in the near term to achieve the reductions that we need for the near term, I fully support that. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Board Member McMillan. Board Member Padilla-Campos?
Yeah, kind of along the same lines. Just to be clear, our motion did not separate both ports, right? This was for both, right? So we still have this February deadline for both. If we were to separate them because one is being more cooperative than the other, we would have to take another vote for that, right? I think that this question is for staff or for Barbara.
Yeah, currently
I don't think we make.
I think currently the a deadline remains the same for both ports, and that the committee would need to take a vote to change the deadline for whatever reason for either one or both of the ports.
That I'm referring to, if Port of Long Beach is working hard, is meeting the deadline, but LA hasn't stepped up, what happens then? Or does this MOU have to be one for all?
I don't believe the MOU has to be one for all, board member. I think that there's different mechanisms that you can look at. And I think that the whole incentive was to try to get this quickly and to enter into what would be, we believe, a mutually beneficial arrangement. By the same token, if a party doesn't want to participate, we can make sure that there are either provisions that apply to the party that hasn't entered into an MOU by a certain date, or we can ensure that there are other provisions, whether it's through an ISR, whether it's through a backstop, whether it's through some other mechanisms that would again apply to the party that hasn't entered into an agreement by a date certain. And so for us right now, it's premature to say one way or the other how it's going to go, because it very well could be that the Port of Los Angeles very quickly comes up with some offers that are in line or above and beyond what the Port of Long Beach has done, and we could move very quickly. And the converse could also be true, is that they continue to proceed along the lines of NACAP, and in which case the board was clear that that also wasn't sufficient and that we would proceed on ISR. So I think we have options before us, board member, is what I'm saying.
Mr. Co-chair, may I revise my previous advice? I've been reminded that the deadlines that we've been discussing were set by the full board and not just the Marine Port Committee, so it would require returning to the full board to change the deadlines.
Certainly, thank you. Was that all, Board Member Padilla-Campos?
Yeah, for now. And I just want to be clear, I'm not suggesting we change the deadline at all, if anything.
Absolutely.
I think we've given them plenty of time.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Supervisor Bartlett?
Thank you. So I think I have a letter dated November 18th from the Port of Los Angeles relative to some of the things that are still require consideration from their board. And while these are all wonderful things that could move forward, I think AQMD staff needs to the extent possible, continue to push them along so that things that are in an ideal state right now as far as implementation, that they actually get the attention of the board of the harbor commissioners and get some response back, because we do have some deadlines coming up, and it would be great if we can get both ports on the same page relative to the changes that are going to take place, get approvals by both boards, so that as an agency, we can deal with both boards consistently and at the same level. But we've got to have some forward movement. And I know right now, one of the ports versus the other is making a little bit more of a forward movement. So whatever we can do to continue to kind of light a fire, let's do so. We want to try to get through the MOU process and get things solidified and not have to go through the rulemaking, but everything remains to be seen at this point. It's all about forward motion and progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. I think that's all the board member comments. I'll just conclude with, I want to encourage everyone to put the best foot forward. Thank you, Long Beach, for stepping forward. Let's get that document in writing. Port of Los Angeles, I want to encourage you. I think you can get there. I think you can get there. Go to your board, have an honest conversation, and let's keep in mind that this is one of the most important issues of our time. These transitions that are taking place at our ports. People have advocated for this for so very long, to have clean air at our ports. Our ports have been leaders in the past, and now is not the time to delay. We have to move with the fierce urgency of now. And that said, that concludes this portion of the meeting. In this item, there's no vote required. We're going to now go to our second public comment period for issues not currently discussed on the agenda. Okay, go ahead and raise your hand if there's any comment not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, that satisfies the agenda, and I think we can go ahead and adjourn. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rex.
Thank you.
You have a great
Thank you, Rex.
Thanksgiving.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving, everyone.